Thank you, everybody, for attending. I'm very, very excited for us to have this great conversation with researchers who've been doing conducting research with vehicle residents, particularly in California, talking a little bit about their research, about how they've been conducting that research, and particularly working with communities of people living in vehicles as really centering people with lived experience of living in vehicles as not just like focus groups or something like that, but it's really the drivers of this research. So that they are the sources of knowledge, they're the experts, and really relying on them to help us to better understand how to conduct the research and what are ethical and responsible ways to gather information and publish that information, because as we all know, information is powerful, and it's important that we're very careful about how the sorts of stories and narratives that information can share. So once again, my name is Dr. Graham Pruss. I'm very excited to welcome colleagues Thomas Knight, Gabriello Gabrion, Sam Lutzker, and Peggy Lee Kennedy, who are joining us from all across the state of California to talk about the research that we've all been involved in over the past year. We're going to do a basic brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about conducting research, first off with RV residents in San Jose, California, about a study that we conducted last fall for a very brief period of time. We'll talk a little bit about why that was. And talking also about collaboration and professional development with folks with lived experience, Tom and Gabriella will be talking a bit about that and how that worked with our program in San Jose. And then we're going to be transitioning over to Sam and Peggy Lee to talk about conducting research with vehicle residents in Los Angeles. And full disclosure, Sam actually was part of both of these studies. And so there's a nice kind of overlap and segue there. You'll see Sam in some of these photos from our study in San Jose. He was a research assistant on that study and is leading, I believe, right? The study that's in LA. Leading with the community, maybe I should say. So the photo here you see is actually Thomas. Thomas on the left, instructing fellow LEABSV. LEAB stands for the Lived Experience Advisory Board of Silicon Valley, but it's LEABSV. Thank you. It's not LEABSV. Thomas, thank you for correcting me on that. But the LEABSV, he's actually instructing fellow LEABSV members on how to conduct the RV survey. So that was right at the beginning of our survey, and helping people to understand how they would be doing the surveys. Actually, I think at that point you might have even been talking about taking notes. I see the notepad in your hand on taking notes on impressions that people had when they entered into places and sort of learning, recording what they saw when they first got there. So we conducted surveys with RV residents in San Jose, California. San Jose, a map of San Jose is on the right. San Jose is a very large city. If you're not familiar with it, it's the third largest city on the West Coast behind Los Angeles and San Diego. Not a lot of people know that. There's a significant RV population in San Jose. The numbers are estimated to be around 770 people. Now, that's probably an undercount. It's probably more than that, but we really don't know. That's part of the issues around knowing how many people are living in vehicles, as we've talked about multiple times in this summit. And on the left-hand side, you can see a photo of myself and Tom at an RV survey site and with an airplane flying overhead. I think Sam probably took that photo of us as well. And you can see many of the RVs in the area behind it. This was at an area that is right below the air path, as you can see, the flight path of airplanes going into the municipal airport, the international airport. And this is one of the things that was common among the locations that we conducted our surveys at, which we conducted surveys in 5 different districts all across San Jose. And many of the places where people were already living in vehicles, particularly in RVs, which was the focus of our survey. And many of these locations were industrial zones, under flight paths, very noisy, very polluted. Of course, this is not because of the people living in the vehicles necessarily, but because of the conditions of where they were allowed to park. And so it just kind of gives a little bit of context. And most of the interviews we had were loud, right? I mean, there's a lot of other noises going by, a lot of traffic going by, and it was one thing that we had to contend with as we were conducting the research. So we had some pretty specific study goals, which were challenging in a sense. One of them was that we were going to conduct English and Spanish interviews with approximately 20 to 25% of the estimated RV resident population, which again was estimated to be about 770 by the nonprofit partner we worked with, that were living in areas across San Jose. So that would mean about between 150 to 190 surveys. That may seem like a lot. It is for a survey like this. And a 20 to 25% of the estimated population is generally statistically relevant. It's not fully representative, of course, of all people, but helps us to have an understanding of what the community of people living in vehicles need, what their experiences have been, and sort of what they're looking for in terms of stability in housing. One of the other goals was to collaborate with the Lived Experience Advisory Board of Silicon Valley, LEABSV, to conduct these surveys and also to provide professional development opportunities that would help to train them, the LEABSV, on crafting, conducting, and analyzing research for their own policy and program recommendations, recognizing that the LEAB wanted to have these skills as well so they could do their own studies about issues that were important to them and their community. And so that was part of our work, was to help to provide that professional development training as we did this. And finally, we were supposed to do all of this, develop this survey, conduct the survey, analyze the survey within about 4 months. I think we signed the final contract for this all in September. We launched the surveys in October, between October and November, and and concluded it all before Thanksgiving, and had our final executive report out before the end of December, which is very accelerated timeline. That's often not the speed at which surveys like this occur, but it was really driven by the funding that we had to do this. That the nonprofit had to have the survey done by the end of the year, and wasn't able to really sort of move forward on developing the contract until about September. So everything we're talking about was done at a very, very fast pace, much faster than normally you would see in a survey like this. So one of the ways that we approached this survey was using a model that's pretty common if you're familiar with surveys with people or research, social science research, which is called community-based participatory research model, or CBPR. And this is an approach that is, here's the whole quote from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, but essentially it is this collaborative research model that's designed to ensure and establish structures for participation by communities affected by the issue being studied. I think it should be studied. I have a typo there. Also representatives of the organizations and researchers in all aspects of the research project to improve health and well-being through taking action, including social change. That's a lot of words, but a lot of what that means is, like I said before, engaging with the people who are part of the research, who you will be researching and surveying, so that they're actually part of the total study, not just as a focus group, but actually helping to develop the questions, helping to conduct the survey itself, having to analyze the data and publish it. And so Thomas Knight and Gabriella, who've joined us today, this is part of that. They are now part of sharing the data that they gathered with their team. And this is really at the core of the CBPR model, is that it's interweaving this relationship with the community throughout the research, so that, again, they're not just sort of on the side, people aren't just on the side focus groups that we reach out to for specific questions, but that they really are centered within the research and driving it forward themselves. So we also used, this is the last slide I'm going to do because we have a lot of information to cover in this, and we want to have questions too. I want to remind you, if you do have any questions about any of this research or any of the things we share, please send a message to our chat mod. They're going to collect that information and they'll share it back into the conversation. We'd love to have some questions and answers at the end. So one of the things that we did early on, actually, we found that it is very difficult to conduct research with people living in the public, living in public spaces who are unhoused, often because there's a lot of fear of what research might be, of talking about their experiences, fear of the connection with local authorities, and just the kind of the fear of outsiders, right? That anybody who comes in who's not from the community could be potentially bringing in danger. And so early on, when we initially thought, Sam and I, as we were putting together this whole plan, thought of going door to door and knocking on vehicle windows, which is pretty common and kind of the way that outreach is conducted. But in conversations with the LEABSV, they said, that may not be a good idea because it's so many people are fearful, and and people may not be there as well because many people are working, and that we may need another approach. Also, we found that certain types of knocks could be more challenging than others. The sort of standard, like boom, 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 boom is sort of sounds very similar to a police officer's knock, and that we wanted to avoid that sort of thing. But on the other side, we suggested using the knock of shave and a haircut, which is. And we're informed that actually that has some other cultural implications within Spanish. That actually is a curse in a sense. It's a curse word and a curse phrase, and could actually bring up some other trouble. So we, thinking through all this, thought, well, how are we going to do this if we're not going to be knocking on people's doors, and recognizing that doing that knocking on people's doors may only have a couple people that we get responses from to interview. So what we did was we shifted to what we call the community meal engagement model, or community engagement model, that was centered around this concept of a community meal, in which we set up a pop-up tent with tables, hot food, pizzas is actually what we had. We went to Costco every day and bought stacks of pizzas, cheese and pepperoni, and set up the tables, the tents with hot food, drinks, water, snacks, supplies, and including resources and social service guides that were provided to us by the LEABSV, our nonprofit partner that we worked alongside, and to bring this out. And am I still spotlighted here? I am? Okay, good. And then what we did was, one of the values of this was that instead of going door to door by doing our recruitment, this model allowed us to introduce the survey to the total community where we went during that meal, rather than trying to do this sort of door-to-door solicitation. And that was really a valuable technique, because most of the communities where we went had somebody or a few people who were sort of a community leader, often called a shot caller, right? These are the people who are sort of in charge of that community and know who's coming and going in the community. So when we would set up our community meals, they would come to that meal and they would ask, what's going on here? What are you guys doing? And we would tell them about what the survey was and how it was going to operate, and basically educate them first. They would go back to the community and then do recruitment and bring people in. So one of the big key parts of this community meal engagement model was that for the first hour, we didn't actually do any surveys. We didn't do any recruitment. All we did was just set up and had our meal, right? And shared the meal with anybody who showed up. And that was a really great way to, again, introduce the survey to the community rather than more actively recruiting. And ultimately what that did was that led us to we were able to conduct up to 23 surveys per day with a team of 5 peer interviewers. And that is really a lot of interviews. That is, I don't know, I'd have to see a cross-sectional study of how often people are able to do that. But that's, in the research I've done in the past, that is very rare to be able to conduct that many surveys in such a short amount of time. And these were very rich, very informative surveys. These surveys would take place, they were the minimum, it was about 20 minutes, which was kind of the normal standard time, but some of them would be up to 2 hours long as people would really tell out their stories and engage in the conversations. I should also mention that all of the people who were doing the interviews were members of the LEABSV. So these were all people who have lived experience of homelessness, many of which were living in vehicles at the time or had lived in vehicles, and were able to develop also conversations and relationships with people that Gabby's going to talk more about later on. As part of the outcomes of that. So I'm going to actually, at this point, transfer it over to Gabby and to Thomas, who are going to share a little bit about what their experiences were working with this survey. They may mention working with DRVR Consulting. That's our consulting company that did this research. I'm the principal scientist on that with that consulting company. And Sam was, again, working with us as a research assistant. And Tom, actually, we brought on Tom as well as a research assistant from the LEABSV to help oversee this study. So, Gabriella and Tom, would you like to introduce yourself and then and tell us a little bit about what you saw and learned?
My name is Gabriella Gabrian. I am the current chair of the Lived Experience Advisory Board.
And my name's Thomas Knight. I'm a member of the Lived Experience Advisory Board, as well as was a research assistant on this project. Next slide.
So for me, myself, it was really a privilege to participate and develop and learn and engage with the community. In the interview that was like 15-20 minutes, I actually had the longest interviews because for some reason, there was a lot of comfort and authentic conversation and an instant kinship that was like, you know, deep conversation. And it was an emotional engagement for me and many of the LEAB members. Some of the people we interviewed, I have known from my past and of homelessness, and some were friends and some became friends. We continue to engage after the interview and maintain a relationship. Next slide.
And I'll point out too on this slide, you can see on the right there our stack of pizza boxes that we were talking about with the community meal. So you can actually see the community meal and it all being set up. Go on to the next slide.
So here is some of our visits after the survey with residents in the RV. To the right, it's me and one of the LEAB members. We really cherished that experience and it was very rich for us. And we learned a lot about how they engage with each other and the daily struggles. Next slide. Like I said, we continue to advocate for some of the people, and the trust was established and we collaborate, and they let us know what's going on in their spaces and, you know, maintain and share resources. For us, well, for me, at the end of every day, I felt like, you know, emotionally invested. Some of our LEAB members had family members that lived in cars. One specific person from LEAB lost her brother. The day we visited him, he was found dead. And so, you know, the investment of emotional ties and the connections are lasting. I noticed that they also are very connected with each other and watch out for each other and share information. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Gabriella, and thank you, Graham. So one of our observations was displacement trauma, and we saw this a lot because here in San Jose, at least, and I'm sure most every place, but these folks were moved often. We talked to some that, it was a couple of times a year, some that were more than 11 times per year. So and this is a big problem for a lot of these folks that are not, they're not the normal, like, vehicle resident where they're traveling around. They're very connected and tethered to the area that they're in. But the other problem is that a lot of times these RVs are not operational. They're uninsured, they're not registered. So for them to come and tell them to move causes them a lot of trauma. Next slide, please. We also found that there was a major disconnect from services compared to the unhoused who maybe live in encampments or live on the street, who see outreach workers on a regular basis. It really appeared that the outreach workers didn't see those living in RVs the same way. They didn't get visited nearly as often. And then, of course, that displacement caused a big problem because when they would rarely see an outreach worker, the next time the outreach worker would try to find them and engage with them, they were no longer there. Next slide, please. So the professional development aspect of this survey was amazing. There was a couple of things that really stood out to us. So one, as Graham was running this survey, he ensured that each person who conducted a survey had an hour break after conducting each survey. And this was huge because there was a lot of secondary trauma that, folks that have experienced homelessness relive during these situations. And so not only were they given the hour, but in some cases they were actually allowed to go home because they just didn't feel that they could continue for the day. But the skills that we learned on how to conduct the survey, how to put the survey together, gave us the ability to even move forward and do surveys on our own. Since then, we have conducted waterway surveys using tablets and going down into the creek beds to talk with people. And the other thing was we were able to submit our own supplementary recommendations to the organizations that paid for the study so that we could bring our own feelings and suggestions forth. So thank you, Graham. I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Thomas, and it was such an honor to work with all of you with the LEABSV. We have several pictures of them doing their work, and on the right hand there, actually, I think conducting your survey in the waterways, which was not with us but went on your own, and we found that so valuable, and we learned so much from you, and being able to have this collaboration. And as part of that, just so we are clear here, this survey is currently the data from the survey is going to be released by the city of San Jose. They own the whole survey since they funded it. It will be released. It's planned to be released this fall in October. So I'm sorry that we can't provide more concrete data, but we hope to share that soon. And maybe even we can come back next year and actually share the findings from that data as well, so that people can learn more. But on that note, before I hand it over to Sam, I want to share a little bit of the comparison between our two surveys, because this kind of breaks down sort of the methods and how our surveys work. So our survey, as I mentioned, we conducted, actually the final number that we conducted was 158 surveys in 18 days of survey, which is just mind-blowing if you've ever done this sort of level of surveys, is that we were able to do so. And they were all very positive, actually. There was like no real negative interactions. Everybody had a great response to them, except for there were no negative real challenges, except for, as Gabby pointed out, about a man who actually was related to one of our interviewers, one of the LEAB members, and actually died the night after we had spoke with him, completely unrelated to the survey, but he had been actually visited by police that day and was pretty traumatized by that and passed away afterwards. But then our survey was with residents of oversized vehicles, such as RVs and trailers. We did this in 5 on-street locations and 1 of the RV supportive parking sites, which you saw some photos from earlier. We used this community meal engagement model. And the survey, as we mentioned, was really driven by the Lived Experience Advisory Board of Silicon Valley, as well as our nonprofit partner who helps to fund that, which was named Destination Home. And so they were working with LEABSV and Destination Home. Was an amazing experience to help us stay grounded within this work and really have them really driving what the goals would be and what the outcomes would be. Our funding, as I mentioned, was as a city sponsored. We were consultants on record, DRVR was. We had a consultant contract that was then overseen by the nonprofit sponsor or nonprofit partner, Destination Home. And ultimately, the way that we collected the actual data was we had tablets that people read through the questions on. They entered the information into the tablet, but then we also audio recorded all of the interviews. People, of course, were informed of that and gave permission to do so. There was a whole informed consent. And then that way we were actually able to have the written data as well as an audio recording to sort of check back and make sure that everything was accurate. The one thing that's not listed on here is compensation, and I'm sure somebody's going to ask, I hope you do, and we compensated everybody who was part of the survey with a $50 ATM debit card. So whether or not they actually finished the survey or not, if they started it, they were guaranteed to receive that. And we had very few people actually who didn't live in RVs, but we included in the survey a post-survey questionnaire so that if the interviewer thought the person wasn't living in an RV, they could make a mention of that. Some of our interviewers actually were case managers who had worked with people and knew that these people, that the people they interviewed actually didn't live in an RV, that they lived in like an apartment or something like that. But that was really useful for them to fill that in, and then we were able to sort of screen them out of the survey afterwards. But Sam, would you like to talk a little bit about sort of the model of your survey, and then maybe move into a little bit about how it was conducted?
Sure. Yeah, and thank you, Graham. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Gabriella, for laying out the San Jose study so perfectly. My name's Sam Lutzker. I'm a PhD candidate in sociology at UCLA. I'm also part of Venice Justice Committee and our survey project, which is with Vehicle Residents more broadly. So our project compared to the San Jose project, I was a part of both of them, so I can speak a little bit to how they compare. One big way is the timeline. We have, in some ways, the luxury or curse of more time. So we don't have like a definitive end date. We do have like some project markers, but we've sort of have gradually grown our survey, including grown our survey enumerators, which are the people who conduct the surveys, which I'll get into in a second. And so far we have 48 surveys in 4 months. So, in a year, we could be at the level of the San Jose survey in terms of number of responses, but we'll see. We may sort of jump a bit in the summer. It kind of depends on our volunteers. So in terms of our participants, we're not just looking at people in oversized vehicles. We're looking at people in a variety of vehicle types and scenarios, and we do not currently have safe parking access. And the questions in some ways are geared, I think we would add some questions too if we actually gained access. So that could be, one of the nice things about having this as this volunteer-led survey is we can kind of grow or shrink parts of it as we desire over the course of it. So it can be adjusted. We're not under the same sort of parameters of a contract survey in the same sort of way. So if we did get safe parking access in a few months, we'd probably add a module for that. But we haven't talked about that yet. So in terms of our recruitment, we're doing more, I don't want to say typical, but kind of, yeah, in a sense, typical one-on-one survey outreach model recruitment where you go, you kind of call out, maybe you're with a partner, we're almost always going out with another person, so you almost always have another person nearby. You may knock depending. I don't think we've totally done away with the knock, despite some of our insights on the San Jose project about knocking. In terms of the key stakeholders, I would say that it's driven by volunteers, some of whom have lived experience. And one of the big differences, which I think both contributes to the different timelines as well as the intensity of this, is that this is not really a funded survey project. And this is more typical to probably what a lot of survey projects, like if you're part of a volunteer organization or a mutual aid organization, or like just an activist group of people, or, you know, even in research, like we don't always have our research in academia funded either. This is probably more what that could look like, especially if you're starting out. We were able to get $3,000 to at least cover some of the survey expenses, and to give some folks who have lived experience in our survey, like just a little, you know, something as thanks for their volunteer efforts. But it's much thinner than like having like a contract, but that also in ways gives us the freedom again of like this, of the timeline. In some ways they're golden handcuffs. I feel like we should, you know, like we do want to be done with this also. And then one of the big differences as well is that we just did not try to embed an interview within the survey. I at least found that technically challenging with the San Jose project. So I felt like one of the takeaways I had when we went into this project was that, you know, maybe we can do these separately or something like that. So I have a totally separate interview study that's a UCLA study. So we're kind of doing these in, they're not formally linked, but they're in conjunction with one another. They're like in communication with one another as studies, I would say. So yeah, and we'll just go to the next slide, and I'm going to introduce Peggy Lee Kennedy, who is the founder of this survey. She created it. It's her idea. She's still driving it to this day. I think she still probably does most of the surveys, would be my guess. So, or the most of anyone, I would say.
Hey, so I don't see my face up there, but I guess somebody's gonna stick me on.
You're in the background of the tree. Oh, are you talking about the photo, or oh yeah, you're
Just
speaking.
to
You're good.
highlight me on the screen. It doesn't matter because we're still looking at Sam.
You're highlighted, Peggy.
Am
You
I?
have it.
Okay. So my name's Peggy Lee Kennedy, and I'm a retired accountant. I'm also a paralegal. I have some degrees, which, you know, I don't even care about, but I have a high logical ability. And at the same time, I'm a woman of the people, you know, I'm down for the cause. So originally Venice Justice Committee monitored sweeps. We documented and worked with civil rights attorneys. One of our proud bodies of work is the documentation and evidence we provided in the Desert Train versus City of LA lawsuit, which overturned the living in vehicle law in the Ninth Circuit. It was pretty big achievement for us, and plus I was paralegal on it too. And also our Venice Justice Committee since 2014 runs a free legal clinic for people unhoused or living in vehicles. Look, in LA, people are swept away all the time. They're just swept. And we hear the same stories from almost everybody, vehicle housed or living rough, that they're not really offered services. They're swept mostly. After COVID, there was a huge encampment on the beach, and they swept those people in the middle of the night. And we were out there monitoring. And then they had this program that was more friendly during the day. Oh, if you give us all of your belongings except for 2 bags, we'll give you a crummy hotel room on the other side of LA. And that was called Encampments to Home. The pre-program to the Mayor Bass's now current Inside Safe. And all the documentation we did really didn't go anywhere. So after that, really started, I wanted to, with Streetwatch LA, we started doing surveys of encampments that we knew were going to get swept because they were, you know, the haters were going crazy. So this moved into a survey that we did. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide. This is our original paper survey. And I see the little QR code isn't there. Anyways, that I want to provide to everybody ability to have copies of all of our stuff. And when we do outreach, you know, maybe we don't have a lot of money to offer people for these surveys. We've had like $5, $10 gift certificates, whatnot. But we have a connection to the community, a long-standing connection to this community, and we have Know Your Rights flyers. And that's in the documentation I want to share with people, that you can empower people by knowing their rights also. And that moved into, there it is. So thank you. So that moved, anybody, if you want this, it's yours. Whatever I have, the Word documents, you can change it for your area or whatever. And the paper survey, you can try and make your own if you want to start doing your own. But we moved from there because the results were being put on a spreadsheet, which took me a lot of time. And that's also in this file, just so you know, it took a lot of time. And the spreadsheet in this file is of the paper, 30 people over in a very hot spot by the Bayona Creek, which the more friendly city council person that's no longer there actually had a funding and a program where he was going to try and put people in hotels and not just sweep them. But the new administration is definitely meaner. And you know, now we're at a place where we don't have the audience even. So it's a struggle, but we're working anyways to do this survey. And I would really applaud Sam for sticking with it. He's really turned into quite the less academic person out there on the street than I kind of first met him as. I really appreciate that, because when you get out there, people like it if you can relate to him. So he's a great team member, and he's recruited more volunteers. I really appreciate the camaraderie that we have in doing this project. And I'll turn it back over to Sam.
Wow, thank you, Peggy. Graham, if you could just go back to the last slide for one moment. I think one of the things here that you
Sure thing. And just, we have about 9 minutes left, so I just want to be clear. So just make sure that we're on time.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, one of the things that Peggy said, but I just wanted to really reiterate specifically, is that, like, when we were at this wetlands sweep and we were doing the paper surveys, we were also doing some interviews and some chatting. We were doing a bunch of different things, but we spoke with 33 residents, and one of the things we found was that there was limited outreach without resources when it was happening, and even when it was happening, it was often coercive, such as requiring people to hand over their RV to the city for offers of shelter. We also found that there was this resident interest in 24-hour safe parking that was inclusive of RVs, something that the city of LA doesn't offer, save for 2 lots, one of which is reserved for veterans. And to tell you the truth, I'm not even sure if they're 24-hour, but and you know, we found that the city wasn't following their own policy recommendations. But one of the things we also found, which I believe, you know, Peggy has found again and again to varying degrees, is that they just weren't really interested in engaging with us. And like that, while an online survey wasn't going to necessarily give us the legitimacy that we were missing, because they may still not be interested in engaging with us, it would definitely help us solve some of the bottleneck issues we were facing. And yeah, having like some more standard survey practices, if we were able to say something like, you know, about the demographics, or about, like, you know, where it was, not that we couldn't do that with the paper survey, but if we just had a longer survey, we could say more and sort of, like, you know, kind of speak back to power in the form of, you know, the city or media or whoever, who actually often don't really have good data when they make these big claims. So, like, for example, the column on the left there was just a columnist who, I take it, lives in the nearby Playa Vista, and, you know, sort of put a positive spin on what was happening, but was not following anyone on the ground in any meaningful way. So, like, I think, you know, that this also speaks to the way in which data, you know, we can use it oppositionally to confront power in different ways. And so I think the project is also a case of that. But getting into how we actually did it, our online survey development, if we can go to the next slide, please. So the topics we covered and the question design, this was, you know, surveys, they sort of have branches, you could say, like, where people are often influenced by past surveys they've been a part of, past things they learned about how to ask questions. So two big influences, not the only influences, but two big influences on this project were the Venice Justice Committee paper survey, because we're just going to be talking about the online survey going forward with the kind of glimpse of results that we're going to show you, as well as the San Jose survey, which Graham, Thomas, and Gabriella just talked about. So in terms of our process, we had numerous drafts of questions, which we reviewed and tested with our survey team, sort of testing one another, being like, how would you answer this given like your situation, living in a vehicle in some instances, which was really valuable there. I really think it's important to test any sort of survey or other sort of instrument with people who have lived experience. And I think it's something that we really, the project has continued to really motivate the project and its development. And then we've had additional enumerators come on who've been trained as the survey expands through organizing networks, which is one of the interesting things while we don't have this community meal set up, the people doing the surveys who are taking interest in this project are across different mutual aid groups in different neighborhoods. So they already have some connections, which was similar also to some of the San Jose study too, and some of the people who are able to kind of get us keyed into different camps and things like that. So like, you know, even though we don't have like a tent or things like that, like people aren't for the most part just showing up cold calling. They've probably already been to these places a few times, or at least like know someone they can refer to, you know, like, hey, I know them down the block or something like that. So in terms of the content of our survey, you know, we have stuff on general vehicle information, such as the type of vehicle, whether they own it, whether it's registered, insured, if it's operable, including if it can be towed, how much in tickets there is on it, the location of it, who else is living there. We also have stuff on people's housing, shelter, services, offers, and experiences. So like what programs they've been a part of in their whole lives. You know, if anyone's come by in the last 3 months to talk to them about any sort of programs or things like that. We have a whole section on criminalization because that's something that Peggy has been influence of again from like the beginning of this sort of work that she does with Destler Train versus City of LA and other sorts of efforts that she's had to combat criminalization. And then also the demographic information that's important for us to know, even if we're not a representative survey, we need to know, are we missing certain groups of people, you know, just to try to even things out a bit so we can say something more general. And yeah, we'll just go to the next slide. So we're not ready to show our results yet, but we did want to at least give an example of like how this can be used and how this can even be used on the ground. Like if you're, say, a group that's a participant in our survey, like you're out there doing surveys with us, like you could, for example, go to a block that you know is going to get swept soon, do a survey with people there, and we could pull out results one by one like this, and then kind of put that into like a 2-page document that, you know, is sent to the council office, whatever other city authorities, media, saying like, look, you're saying this in your operations, you're not following your own protocols, people aren't getting offers of services that you say they are, like, what are you going to do about this? So this is also, it's not just like a final report type thing. It's also something that I think with our flexible structure can be used on the ground like that. But to give you an example, like if you just wanted to say something about the level of outreach at a site or like the level of ticketing or criminalization going on, these two questions are like a good sort of entryway into that. So like on the left, you know, how much to the nearest dollar is owed on parking tickets for that vehicle? You see that most people owe something in parking tickets. However, on the right, you see that most people have not been contacted with an offer of shelter housing within the past 90 days. So you see that disconnect between people are being excessively ticketed, but they're not getting sufficient outreach. And we can go to the next slide. I know we're running out of time here. So, so the lessons learned so far, if I could just kind of draw this all together, because I think this presentation is really about inspiring people also that they can do this sort of community engaged research. I would say, you know, try to keep, maybe this is also counter to some of the things that other people want to say, but I would say that short and sweet is good for a survey, at least. If you want to do an interview, I think like it's really great to have an interview that's like an hour, 2 hours long. I'm a big fan of oral histories, but for a survey, you keep it short and sweet because for most people, that's going to be kind of where they want to, how much time they want to spend. I would say also to establish clear personal boundaries for where and when you do surveys. Like, will you enter someone's RV? Will you not enter their RV? It depends sort of on comfort level. I'm an ethnographer, so sometimes I'm comfortable with that. I'm also, a bigger masculine figure. So like there's different risk levels that come with, varying positions and how you're sort of existing when you're doing the survey in that site. We've also learned mentioning compensation upfront changes the interaction. We actually, with feedback from one of our members who themselves lives in the vehicle, we decided to not mention it actually at the start of the survey and to just give it at the end of a token of thanks, which is one difference. I would also say avoiding open-ended questions, but offering an other answer option is great, because then people can sort of like opt into what the answer that didn't exist was, and it can also help you even improve your survey. These are some more survey specific suggestions, such as limiting answer choices. I know we're out of time. Last thing, maybe don't use SurveyMonkey. I think we kind of on both surveys thought that was a takeaway, that there are better survey softwares to use, but feel free to get in touch with any of us. You can reach out to us, our info's in the chat. And yeah, I'll turn it back over to Graham, but thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Sam. And I know we're at 2:15, so we're gonna end this and head back into the same thing. I want to be clear: we're not giving a negative endorsement of SurveyMonkey, but we just found it wasn't the best one for what we wanted to do. So we did actually look into some other ones. Please reach out to any one of us. We dropped our email into the chat if you'd like to learn more about these types of surveys, about how to conduct these types of surveys. Again, if you'd like to learn more about the work that we do at DRVR Consulting to do these sorts of surveys and research with people living in vehicles. That stands actually for Developmental Research on Vehicle Residency, is DRVR. So if you'd like to learn more about the work that we do, please contact me directly at Graham@DRVR Consulting. Otherwise, I think I'm going to end this survey. I want to thank you end this survey. I'm going to end this conversation. Thank you to everybody who was part of this. Thank you, Sam, for being a part of our work, for being a research assistant on our work, and also doing the work that you're doing down in LA. Thank you, Peggy Lee, for being an amazing advocate within your community and for helping us to learn more about people's needs in LA. And I want to thank you, Thomas Knight and Gabriella Gabrion, for the honor to work with you and the LEABSV. I've been so proud of the work that we've been able to do and can't wait to do much more. Thank you, everybody, for attending this session. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope that this continues our conversation. We look forward to sharing our full data, hopefully next year. So come on back next to our summit next year, and we'll talk more about it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the summit. We'll see you soon.